Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 16 from book 3 of Eutropius' account of Hannibal from his breviarium, right, in the Second Punic War. So if you think back to where we've been, we've already talked about Macedon, and that's shown up a few times. We had, the Romans kind of settling and making peace with Macedon and the Greek city-states. Then Sicily opened up as a major area of the war. You had the siege of Syracuse. You had the capture of Agrigentum. And basically all of Sicily had been recaptured or taken by the Romans. We also had Sardinia at one point, a rebellion there that got put down. And we had talk about Spain, right, with Scipio Africanus. So at this point in the narrative, the two major areas we're looking at are Spain and Italy. And these have been battlegrounds for basically the entire Second Punic War. You still have Hannibal in Italy, right? The Romans haven't been able to defeat him or drive him out. He's still causing problems, particularly in southern Italy. He's taken a lot of these cities. And you still have in Spain the strong Carthaginian resistance. So we had the rise of Scipio Africanus, right? He's not called Africanus yet, but he's there. He took over the command at a very young age, and he had captured Carthago Nova, which was a major victory for the Romans, but he's still trying to subdue and put down all the Carthaginian influence in Spain before they can turn their attention to actual Carthage, right, the city of Carthage. So that's where we're picking up this story. We had just been talking about Spain in the previous video, and we're going to shift gears back to Italy. So the narrative starts with this. You have Interia in Italia, consul Quintus Fabius Maximus Tarentum recepit, inqua ingentes copiae Hannibales erant. So you have meanwhile, right, this is our kind of shifting word, right, back at the ranch type thing. You have meanwhile in Italy. And then you have consul Quintus Fabius Maximus. So this name should sound familiar. It's the same Quintus Fabius Maximus that we saw being dictator, right? So he's back, and we'll talk about that in a second. But you have Quintus Fabius Maximus, the consul. He recovered, recapit, he took back Tarentum, right? And we'll talk about what this city is and why it's important. But he basically captures or recaptures the city of Tarentum. Then you have inqua, which means in which, right? Just a relative pronoun there. So you have in which huge troops or a large amount of troops of Hannibal there were. So you could say in which there were like large numbers of troops of Hannibal, right? It's really sort of troops, supplies, that whole thing. It was a major power base for Hannibal. So like we said, this is the return of Quintus Fabius Maximus, also known as Cunctator, the delayer. Right. So he had been dictator earlier, right before the Battle of Cannae, and his strategy was delaying. He was the proponent very early on of not engaging Hannibal in open combat. He didn't think it was the right idea. Instead, he thought if they just kind of engaged Hannibal on the periphery and cut off supply lines and kind of attacked him when it was more advantageous in small skirmishes, that they could wear Hannibal down, and eventually he'd run out of supplies and be forced to kind of submit. But it was more the war of attrition is what Fabius is really about. So he's back, he's elected consul, and this is kind of his swan song, right? The Battle of Tarentum, which is what this this part or this line of the chapter is referencing, right? So this is around 209 BCE, and the people of Tarentum, there's actually two kind of battles of Tarentum. The first one was where the people of Tarentum had betrayed the Romans, right? And they'd opened up the city to Hannibal. So Tarentum is in southeast Italy. It's near the heel of Italy, if you want to think of where it is on the map. So this is one of Hannibal's power bases, right? That's where he's been. This is where he's getting that contact with Macedon to the east, right? That southern and particularly southeast area of Italy has been firmly in the grasp of Hannibal for years at this point. But Tarentum was an important city that had basically joined with Hannibal and betrayed the Romans. So this is sort of a revenge attack for the Romans, and Fabius kind of portrays it that way as, we're getting vengeance, right? Our vengeance against Hannibal. But the interesting thing is that when you read about this particular Battle of Tarentum, when Fabius shows up, Plutarch tells us that he captures the city the exact same way, right? Through treachery. And you're going to see Carthalo as the Carthaginian general who's going to hand it back to the Romans. So there's a sort of give and take. And I think the Battle of Tarentum gives you a really good snapshot of how the Second Punic War is going in Italy. It's not so much major sieges and big battles or anything like that. It's really a war of morale and trying to win over the people and this kind of flipping of towns. So, the more Hannibal could win and wear down public, trust in the Romans, the more he could capture these cities. And you have to remember, southern and southeastern Italy were very Greek, right? This is Magna Graecia. They're not really firmly Roman. They don't particularly like the Romans. They've been kind of conquered, if you want to say, by the Romans and allied, but their allegiances are very much kind of flip-flopping, right? And so this battle gives you a good sense of that, because they literally betray the city to Hannibal, and a few years later they betray it back to the Romans. So it's sort of a good microcosm of how the war is going in Italy between Hannibal and the Romans, right? So we continue. You have Ibi etiam ducem Hannibalis Carthalonem occidit. And then you have 25, Milia hominum captivorum vendidit praedam militibus dispertivit pecuniam hominum venditorum ad fiscum retulit. So, excuse me, this is still talking about Fabius, right? So there, meaning in Tarentum also, he killed Occidit, he killed a general of Hannibal, Carthalo, right? Carthalona. So Carthalo is actually the one who gives the city up to the Romans, but he is technically a leader or a general of Hannibal, right? And again, this is kind of showing you the flip-flopping of allegiances at Tarentum, right? Then after he takes the city, you have Wainedit, he sold, meaning Fabius sold 25,000, right, XX Vimilia, 25,000 of people and their captive people, right, hominum captivorum, there's your genitive plural. So he took the captives and he sold them into slavery, 25,000 of them. Then the praedam, the loot, dispertivit, he distributed the loot, the praedam, militibus, right? It's dative. It could be to the soldiers or maybe even among the soldiers, makes the most sense. So he gives it to his soldiers, which is a very clever move, right? You want to make sure that your army has good morale, and what better way to do it than making them rich, right? So they take the spoil, they loot the city, and he disperses a lot of it to his soldiers, right? Then the pecuniam, the money, retulit, he returned. So in other words, he brought back the money of the hominum venditorum, of the people having been sold, right? Venditorum is your participle. So the people he sold, right, the 25,000, he returned the money of the people having been sold, meaning, the money he got from selling these people into slavery, ad fiscum, to the treasury. Okay, so this sentence and sort of section is really showing you why the Battle of Tarentum was important. Fabius actually gets, if I remember right, a triumph for this, and it's sort of his crowning achievement. But it's through treachery that he wins it, although I think he tried to cover up, if I remember right, the fact that it had been betrayed to him. But either way, it's a real big boost to Roman morale, right? Here's a city that was wavering in its allegiance. He captures it. He sells a lot of people into slavery, which is a big boost to the economy. He pays the soldiers, right? So now his army's happy. And he's kind of refinancing the treasury. He's rebooting the Roman treasury. They need money, right? Money is how you win battles, right? Because you have to pay for stuff. Particularly your soldiers. So this is a nice snapshot of how, capturing a city would kind of revitalize the Roman army. But it's also a good way to see the one of the big things of the Second Punic War is the influx of slaves. This is really what sets off Rome as being a massively big slave culture. And you'll see later on, if you study it, the impact of all these slaves is going to forever change the Roman economy because they're going to start being basically plantation farmers based off slavery. And you can kind of see it here. 25,000 people sold into slavery is a pretty big number. Okay. Then we continue. Okay. So that's what happened with Fabius. Then you have Tum. Multi civitates Romanorum, quae ad Hannibalem transieran prius, rursus se Fabio Maximo dedideram. So then many cities, multi civitates, many cities of the Romans, right? This doesn't mean like Roman cities, meaning Roman citizens were living there. It means the cities that had been allied with the Romans, right? Under their control is really what it means. So many cities of the Romans, which is probably the best way. You're talking about cities, right? Which had crossed over, transierant, pluperfect, they had crossed over to Hannibal, meaning they had switched their allegiance prius before, right? So it's saying many of the cities which had gone over to Hannibal, now they dediderant se, they gave themselves, rursus, again, to Fabius Maximus, Fabio Maximo, right? So this is a kind of turning point where you're getting that shift in morale where the people of Italy are looking at the greater picture and saying, hey, the Romans are starting to really turn this around. I think we want to be on the winning side. And they start believing that the winning side is going to be the Romans. So this echoes what we saw early on in the narrative when all those cities flipped to Hannibal, particularly after things like the Battle of Cannae, where the Italian states were looking and saying, there's no way the Romans are going to win, right? They all changed pledged their allegiance. Now they're all flipping back. So it's a big boost to morale and sort of the war effort in Italy. Things are starting to turn, but at the same time, you still have Hannibal running around. So it's not perfect yet. Now we switch gears again. We're coming back to Spain. You have Insequenti anno, Scipio in Hispania, egregias, res eget et per se et per fratrem suum el Scipionem, LXX civitates receperunt. So in the following year, here's an ablative of time using a present participle insequenti, right? So in the following year, the next year, Scipio, he did in Spain, egregias res, sort of miraculous or outstanding things, you might say. And it's et, so there's your correlative, both himself per se and through his brother, right? Suum fratrem, his brother is Lucius Scipio. Okay, so he's there with his brother, and the two of them are doing all these great things. And it's saying together, receperunt, they recovered or took back 70 cities, LXX civitates. So they recover or take for the Romans, 70 cities. So he's doing really well. Okay, then you have in Italia, tamen, male pugnatum est. However, right, in Italy, tamen, pugnatum est, it was fought. It's perfect passive. It's sort of an impersonal one, meaning like the war was fought, male, badly. So in Italy, though, it's not going so well, right? The fighting is not going great. But in Spain, things are going really well for Scipio Africanus and his brother, and they're starting to really turn the tide. In Italy, even though Fabius had been doing well, now it's not so much. And the reason why is this final line. And again, this is sort of classic Eutropius rhetoric, where you build up how everything's going great, and then you kind of end a chapter with something horrible, right? And usually it's something along these lines with Hannibal. You have Nam Claudius Marcellus consul ab Hannibale occisus est. So things were going badly in Italy because, or for, Nam, Claudius Marcellus, the consul, and this is the same Marcellus who had captured Syracuse. So we've heard of him before. He's a very good general. So the consul, Claudius Marcellus, occisus est, he was killed ab Hannibale, by Hannibal. There's your ablative of agent. So this is a reference to the fact that, Marcellus was a person who followed Fabius. They were friends. He's a big delayer, right? So he doesn't fight him in open battle. If I remember right, he was out on a small scouting party. They get ambushed and the consul gets killed, right? So this is another major blow to Roman morale when you have the leader, your leading general, literally your commander-in-chief, right? The leader of the republic getting killed. And once again, it's Hannibal doing it. This is probably the fourth or fifth consul he's killed at this point. Every time he does it, it's sort of a blow to morale, which is what Eutropius is mentioning here and why he said it's not going so great in Italy. So this chapter is a little shorter, but again, you can see it's really crystallizing into Italy and Spain. Italy and Spain. These are the battlegrounds. And who are the two main characters? It's really shaping up for Scipio versus Hannibal. These are the two men who are going to have to battle it out at some point. Scipio is doing well in Spain. Hannibal continues to do well in Italy, even though he loses places like Tarentum, right? It's still Hannibal's world in southern Italy, and the Romans are not able to defeat him, and they probably don't want to defeat him in open battle yet because they're kind of afraid of him. So he's still operating in southern Italy, right? So you can kind of see how, again, Eutropius widened the narrative earlier on when he brought in a bunch of different places like Macedon and Sicily. Now he's closing the narrative again to really focus on what's about to happen to end the war. So hopefully that made sense. If you have any questions at all, feel free to put them in the comments below. But otherwise, just keep working at it. Try to read the story aloud. I always tell you, if you can read it aloud, work on the speaking and listening. That's a major part of it. But otherwise, just follow. There's not a ton of crazy grammar in this section. So if you can figure out the vocab, take the grammar one bit at a time, you should be okay. But like I said, if you need anything, let me know. Otherwise, good luck with it.